Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm audible. On behalf of EPICO Klima Innovation, European Environmental Bureau, Zukunft Klima Sozial, and TNE, I am very pleased to welcome you to our event, Ensuring the Success of the ETS2, the Role of Direct Payments. One of the cornerstones of the Fit for 55 package is the extension of the EU ETS to the buildings and transport sectors. The so-called ETS2, set to come into force next year, will be decisive for reaching climate goals in the transport and building sectors. However, the ETS2 is facing strong headwinds. We are witnessing calls to delay, dilute, or abolish the system, with critical voices coming from EU member states such as Poland, Estonia, Slovakia, and Bulgaria. The concerns of these countries are driven by potentially high prices in the EU ETS2, which, as per one estimate from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and E3 modeling, could be in a range between 71 and 261 euro per ton of CO2. At the same time, it is important to bear in mind that the less we invest in decarbonisation in these sectors today, the higher this price is likely to be in the future. The ETS2 requires a robust policy mix to address the market failures in the buildings and road transport sectors. This is particularly important for facilitating the adoption of non-fossil fuel-based technologies and building the necessary infrastructure, which cannot be achieved solely through carbon pricing. ETS2 revenues will urgently be needed to channel back towards these investments. But simultaneously, channeling back a part of the ETS2 revenues towards direct payments can play an important role in supporting vulnerable households and transport users by returning revenues from carbon pricing to households in a transparent manner. This way, we can strengthen social justice and also build support for the EU ETS2. The focus of today's discussion will be exactly this mechanism of direct payments, known variously in academic and political discourses as revenue recycling, climate bonus, climate dividend, or climate premium. I would briefly like to touch upon three aspects of revenue recycling or direct payments. First, the objective and role of direct payments. Second, guidelines for designing direct payment schemes. And third, the relevance of national circumstances in particular member states in shaping the type of direct payment instruments required. So I would like to start by discussing the objective and role of direct payments. Even though carbon pricing schemes are deemed by economists to be the most effective way to reduce emissions, they are typically not very popular among politicians who may be reluctant to implement these owing to the risk of backlash, and citizens who may be saddled with higher energy bills and transport costs. As per a World Bank estimate from last year, only 24% of the world's GHG emissions were covered by an emissions trading scheme or carbon pricing, a statistic that underscores the difficulty of mainstreaming this economic instrument to reduce emissions. One of the main reasons carbon pricing tools are unpopular is because they can have a regressive effect, which means that they may hit financially disadvantaged individuals the hardest, who are also the most reliant on fossil fuels in heating and transport. Direct payments under a carbon pricing scheme like the ETS2 can therefore serve a dual purpose. On the one hand, they can mitigate the financial burden faced by the effect of carbon price in the buildings and transport sectors by offsetting partly or fully the income effect of the carbon price. And on the other hand, direct payments can signal greater transparency and foster acceptance for the carbon pricing system as a whole. Therefore, if the ETS2 is accompanied by revenue recycling measures by member states, this can actively help prevent backlash against the ETS2 as a whole and improve the overall credibility of carbon pricing as an instrument. Next, I would like to highlight the design elements of revenue recycling. The goal of fair compensation has been highlighted as being crucial to the success of direct payment instruments. The perception of fairness can have many facets. For example, the transparency in the mode of payout, the eligibility for being paid back, depending on the socio-economic circumstances of an individual, and knowing in advance what this amount is going to be. In a paper published last year, Jakob Edenhofer and Federica Genovese studied the successes and failures in existing examples of revenue recycling to arrive at a set of four criteria for the success of direct payments. First, the payments should be encompassing, such that they address the multiple risks and inequalities created by climate policy. Second, the compensation schemes should be administratively feasible and adequately supported by legal and governance structures in place. The third criterion for success is visibility. People should know that they are being or have been compensated, or that they are eligible for compensation. And lastly, the direct payment schemes should be credible by creating trust that the governments will keep their promise to pay, not just in the present, but also in the future. Similarly, a study published within the framework of the Ariadne project in Germany in 2022 arrived at the conclusion that the payout of climate dividends should not only minimize administrative burdens, but also maximize the visibility of the payout to promote acceptance. This means that when citizens receive the payments, they should be able to establish an immediate mental connection to the carbon pricing and, in fact, perceive the payout as corresponding relief. We have already seen the first few instances of revenue recycling in Europe and can draw some conclusions from these for the optimal design of direct payment instruments. For example, every resident in Austria is eligible to receive the climate bonus financed by the carbon pricing system there. The bonus is regionally adjusted on the basis of the availability of public transport and infrastructure and can be 145 euro, 195 euro, 245 euro, or 290 euros. In order to enhance social fairness, recipients with an annual income exceeding 66,612 euro are taxed on the climate bonus. One of the most laudable aspects of the Austrian model is that the payments are made through a direct bank transfer by the government, with overhead administrative costs kept to as low as 0.65% in the first year. To take another example, the Swiss system of climate dividends is based on a reimbursement of 2/3 of the revenues from the carbon pricing system, while the remaining third is utilized for financing schemes to promote the renovation of buildings. The revenue recycling takes place in the form of automatic deductions in the health insurance system, which renders the payment somewhat opaque. As per one survey, only 24% of the interviewees were aware of a climate premium being paid out through the insurance system, highlighting both the need for better communication by the government as well as a clearer link to carbon pricing and climate goals. In Germany, the previous federal government planned the payout of a social compensation mechanism for low-income households using carbon pricing revenues in its coalition agreement of 2021, though the promise was never realized. The current government also made the return of carbon pricing revenues to citizens, and in particular to heavily burdened households, a focal area in its coalition agreement in 2025, although the exact details remain to be clarified. The German experience highlights the need for greater transparency in the manner and extent of payouts, and especially the establishment of a feasible administrative framework to effectively enable the payments. Third, I would like to mention that the national circumstances in individual EU member states will be crucial for determining the focus and extent of the direct payments so that they are conducive to the goals sought to be achieved, a goal that policymakers must deliberate upon before putting a system for direct payments in place. Some relevant factors to consider include the expected changes in population and population size and economic growth, as well as the stage or rate of decarbonisation in the buildings and road transport sectors in the country. To cite one example, a projection by Ecologic Institute and Öko Institute for the building sector shows that the highest increase in emissions in the period between 2005 and 2030 will be in Malta, Estonia, and Romania to the tune of 21%, 6%, and 3% respectively. In the same time period, Denmark, Sweden, and Slovenia are expected to reduce their building sector emissions by 82%, 81%, and 76% respectively. In the transport sector, domestic emissions in Romania and Poland are expected to increase by 87% and 83% respectively, while Sweden and Luxembourg are likely to reduce their emissions by 70% and 68% respectively. This shows that direct payments cannot follow a one-size-fits-all approach and must be carefully thought through and tailored to the specific interests, needs, and circumstances of the member state and channeled to the groups that may need the compensation and relief the most. These were just some initial reflections to set the stage for our discussion today. And now I'm very pleased to welcome our keynote speaker, Beatrice Jordi, Director, Carbon Markets and Clean Mobility, DG Klima of the European Commission, who has been responsible for the EU ETS 2 and EU ETS and international cooperation on carbon markets since 2017. Ms. Jordi has been one of the leading figures involved in the design, conception, and implementation of the Fit for 55 package, and a strong advocate for the introduction of the ETS 2 as part of this package, as well as for the creation of the Social Climate Fund. Therefore, I cannot think of a better person to address this gathering with a keynote speech on how we should use revenues from EU ETS 2 to decarbonize the buildings and transport sectors. Ms. Jordi, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Mrs. Kamour. A pleasure to be here today after a sprint from Schumann. Sorry that it took, I was delayed some minutes. Great to be here today to discuss ETS 2. that, yeah, I'm very proud that we have this legislation in place, because building and transport are two sectors, big sectors, that they keep the emissions growing. Even if some positive news in 2023 in the building sector, they are increasing, if not stabilizing or otherwise increasing. We know that transport emissions are higher than in the 90s, while other sectors have been doing an effort in decarbonisation. So when we proposed ETS2, I will not say that it was a walk in the park, the negotiation, because it was not. It was a difficult dossier. But we made it. We made it with Council, with Parliament, with the stakeholders as you, supporting that now 75% of the European economy is covered by carbon pricing. Before it was 45% with aviation, with maritime, with power sector, with industry, and now with ETS2. I have to say that also one of the arguments that helped the negotiation was the fairness between transport sectors and fairness between building options. Because if you have, for example, an electrical vehicle, you're under the ETS because electricity is, but if you have a combustion car, it was not under the ETS. Or you have a heat pump, it was not under the ETS, it was under the ETS, sorry, and you have a gas boiler, and it was not under the ETS. So it was also fairness of competition. Building and transport are two sectors that depend, transport 90% on fossil fuels, and buildings 50% on fossil fuels. And Europe is paying an invoice. Of course, citizens pay their energy bills, but as Europeans, we are paying the order of 200, 400 billion per year of inputs on fossil fuels. So here we are with ETS2. We are going to implement it, as you know, in 2027, and we have started already with everything that is monitoring how it will work, working with what we call the national administration, and not also national administration, with distributors of fossil fuels, those who are going to be responsible for ETS2. So you mentioned it before, that we need a policy mix. I mean, it's not, we are big defenders of carbon pricing, but it doesn't mean that carbon pricing is a kind of magic stick to solve everything. We will not make a carbon pricing without national measures and other European measures. From the Building Directive, the EPBD, from national policies on transport, from fair fiscality, and let me insist on that one. We want a more electrified Europe, but at the same time, we still have very distortive fiscalities in member states where gas is less imposed in fiscal terms than electricity, or where you have, and thanks God that Belgium changed the law on corporate fleets, that they were in the past pushing for fossil fuel combustion and not anymore now. So over-reliance on a strengthened regulatory policy, it would lead to higher burdens. So the more national policies, the more public transport, electrical vehicles, uncoupling policies, refurbishment of buildings, the lower the price would be. We know that our estimations in the Commission are lower than what they are also in the hands of some analysts, but I think that the key is which is the weight we give to national policies and which is the weight we give to carbon pricing. It's not only, I mean, it's in a way protects citizens, the vulnerable ones, which is true, but also is given opportunities to citizens. Because sometimes you have the offer to go to the more polluting choice, but you don't have the offer to go to the cleaner choice. And these opportunities for citizens and also for industries that work in refurbishment of buildings, or industries that work in heat pumps, or industries that work in electrical vehicles will have an opportunity. The use of revenue, and this is use of revenue and social climate fund, I mean the direct payments. Just let me go, I mean, of course the ETS raises revenue, and what we would like with this raising revenue, we would like to have a progressive policy and not a degressive policy. If we have countries that they will pay from vulnerables per year from 50 euros, or the richer citizens will reach 400 euros, we would like to reverse that and invest those who can afford these higher prices to invest in more vulnerable citizens and in middle class. So it's also addressed to other citizens. In the negotiation of the ETS2, one of the key points for the success was that we present the Social Climate Fund. It's first in its kind, I'm very proud of that polluter pays money goes to a social measure. And it was to address, it wants to also address the root causes. So it's not only money, it's how to address measures that can be locking in vulnerable citizens in this energy poverty and transport poverty. By the way, the first time that we talk about transport poverty was in the Social Climate Fund regulation. It will mobilize nearly 87 billion euro. I'm talking next year to 2032. We have a double solidarity between member states. Those member states who have lower GDP will receive more. And in the member state, vulnerable citizens are the target of this Social Climate Fund. I insist also in the Social Climate Fund negotiations with member states. So the regulation is done, is adopted, and now the steps are that we are discussing with member states on the social climate plans. They need to present them before 30th of June, but believe me, with that we are in very active conversations with them, meetings with them, which type of measures we welcome and clap, and with other measures we say this will not fit in the regulation because it's in the limits, or is not very climate looking, and or because it's not targeted to vulnerable citizens. The social climate plans are also an opportunity to target reforms, and I insist on that. So it's the money and it's the ecosystem, it's the fiscal ecosystem, right? Is the infrastructure. Sometimes micromobility is lacking infrastructure. So surprise, surprise, you don't have micromobility in many member states. It's also the skills of workers of installing heat pumps, are they there? So we go also to reforms of fiscality, of ecosystem, of context, or sometimes that you have electricity prices cap or artificial electricity prices that are not the best for making a climate transition flying. Just in 2 points, and I know Peter Liese is going to come after. He was a rapporteur of ETS. We have Esther de Lange and Casa, the rapporteurs of the Social Climate Fund, and they put two important points, and Peter Liese did it in ETS too. Transparency on where the money goes. And that's a very important one, that sometimes from an European level, we are tied up, if you want, because when a government uses ETS2 revenues to do vouchers for public transport or refurbish 5,000 euro for refurbishment of buildings, it's rare that they say where the money comes from. We want that they say where the money comes from. We have systems like the California system that I'm a little bit jealous there, because when you pick up a tram, you see this money of this tram line comes from the ETS2 revenues. In that case, is the emission trading from California. So transparency is a fundamental one, and please a plea to when those who are in contact with the governments to insist on that point. And the other point is 100% of the revenues need to go to climate investment, a very important one. In ETS1, we have an average, 75% was on European average, but the numbers at member states, they didn't look so rosy. So if a big member state like Germany invested 80%, for example, I remember very well the numbers, but you have Poland investing 40% around that. So the 75% was an European average on ETS1 expenditure in climate, but now both ETS1 and ETS2 have this legal obligation of spend 100% in climate measures. Direct income support. We put this direct income support because, of course, we need to shield those very vulnerable before the reforms come, or before the progressive measure, I mean the money from the wealthier going to the more vulnerable. The regulation allows to a top quantity of up to 37.5% of the money of the social, I'm going now to Social Climate Fund, can be used for direct income support. This was clearly to provide this, to tackle these possible social impacts, but we put conditions. So we put first targeted, then it needs to be digressive, and it needs to be accompanied by other measures, that we are not locking in vulnerable citizens there. In the discussions we are having with member states, very few are asking for the direct income support. First, because due to COVID, there were enormous measures put on with the high energy prices. There were many measures that many countries stay, these measures. So the member states prefer the large majority. I mean, I think we have 4 countries asking for direct income support and not for the top up, not for the 37%, because they prefer to invest in opportunities and measures to citizens. They prefer to those measures that are really changing and getting out of fossil fuels. So if we are doing I hope, we are doing some good work, and I want to put as medals on trying to put best practices, what exists in member states, what it can be copied by others. Why in Estonia a prefabricated refurbishment was super good in cost-effective measures. Why you have transport on demand in Castilla y León in Spain, that you don't need a whole infrastructure, but just a good system that rural areas can have access to whatever coach, vans or taxis in transport on demand. We are, when we have a good meeting with member states on social leasing on electrical vehicles. France has experience on that. They are sharing this experience with others. So we are doing, trying to put the best of on the table, trying to also to work with cities and regions, and for you to know that member states need to consult cities and regions. It is a short time to do the social climate plan, but it should not be a reason for not doing the short term. So we are looking ahead on the proper implementation. We know that it's not the best, I will not say walk in the park dossier, because it's not. I wonder if I have any of the dossiers that I'm dealing with in my portfolio. I deal with ETS 1, maritime and aviation, also cars and trucks, and ETS 2. So I love that there will be very easy dossiers, but I'm afraid they do not exist in the climate and energy transition. So looking ahead for this ETS 2 implementation, social climate plans, we are working very close with member states. Direct income support in our voice and also in the co-legislators, it was a good measure, but limited and with conditions. And the ETS 2 revenue is a very good source. I mean, we are evaluating or estimating with average prices until 2032 of 50 euros, we are talking about 270 billion, put it on the table, or the member states to invest in new measures. Just to say that the Social Climate Fund has parameters, and they should not be forgotten, which have a parameter on rural areas. So the country with more rural areas receive more money, to put it in simple terms. And those countries that have more arrears, so unpaid electricity bills or energy bills, also receive more. And I think the rural area, I have to say that we should not forgotten, is urban, peri-urban, but rural populations that also deserve to have opportunities for ETS 2. So very happy to be here. We have challenging times, but we keep going with the social climate plans discussion, with the ETS 2 implementation, and many thanks for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much for these insightful words. Ms. Jordi, I believe we have time for a couple of questions. Yeah, okay, great. So I'd like to collect some audience questions. Maybe.
It's taking a bit longer.
Thank you. Hello, it's Juan Fernando Lopez from the European Parliament at the Secretariat working at the EPRS. You talk about implementation, and I had a question regarding the national transposition of the ETS 2 provisions. I know that some countries have, most of the countries miss the original deadline, and still some countries are missing to implement ETS 2, if I'm not wrong, including our home country. Do you have some information that you can share about how many countries are still missing to implement ETS 2, and if this could have an impact on the Social Climate Fund? We know we are different regulations, but quite related, so thank you.
Thanks a lot for your question. And yes, we encourage our country, Spain, to implement and transpose. We have, yes, public information. I can share the information with the organization. We have 11 countries that have fully transposed the directive. I'm talking about Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, northern countries. We have also Italy, who has transposed the directive. And we have, so 11 fully transposed. We have 6 member states that are partially transposed. And in this partially transposed, they are very kind of partially transposed. For example, Finland is an island discussion or whatever, just a geographical point. Or Belgium, we are missing Brussels. I don't know if there's any Brussels region here, but Flanders and Wallonia have transposed. We are missing Brussels. But there are other countries like Czechia that they have not transposed the surrender part. So different, I would say, reasons for this partial transposition, and the rest are in process, like the Spanish one that I have the pleasure to go to our national parliament next week. So they are discussing in a committee, and so they are in the process of that. We have some countries that have been, if I could say, negative against ETS2 and publicly negative, Hungary or Czechia, Poland with a delay. So we know that, but so 11 countries have fully transposed. Let's go to the positive parts. We are working with member states with all our full instruments on normal transposition. And the question of the Social Climate Fund. Social Climate Fund doesn't stop because of that, but no social climate funds with a country that has not transposed the ETS2. So that's clear. Which is a kind of normal. This is kind of obvious, but also legally it is like that.
Thank you very much. I'm Marizella from Zukunft Klimasozial, a German think tank. I have a question. You talked about the role of direct payments with the money from the Social Climate Fund, and one advantage of climate dividends could be that it's kind of scaling with the height of CO2 price, and as the Social Climate Fund is kind of capped on a certain value, the question would be if it's possible to use ETS2 revenues for direct payments. And actually in Germany there's a debate going on. I don't know if you're aware of it, but if it's possible, and about the wording in the ETS directive, which says it can finance direct payment systems with a proven environmental impact. So my question would be if a system, for example, as the climate bonus in Austria, can be funded as well under the ETS2 scheme with ETS2 revenues. Thank you.
I think that the intention of co-legislators, and this is our reading now, because I know we have some discussion with stakeholders that they prefer to have the whole ETS2 revenues in direct payment. During the discussion of the co-legislation and what the text, in our opinion, reflects, and also our legal colleagues, is that it's a priority to measures and decarbonizing measures. So it was clear that even in the Social Climate Fund, that is the pot for the more vulnerable people, this was capped, this direct income support. And it was on purpose, and believe me, there were long discussions which number we were capping. So even in the Social Climate Fund, there was a clear signal that the direct payment is important, and why not? Because you say that not every measure fits the whole Europe. This I fully agree. And even in a country, you have different regions, or rural or peri-urban. So this we fully agree on the richness of Europe, on the diversity. But it was a clear intention in the Social Climate Fund to cap it. So in the ETS2 revenues is a priority clear to the measures. It doesn't mean that you cannot do part of that, but it's a priority for measures and investment to decarbonize.
Thank you. I am András Lukács from the Clean Air Action Group Hungary. And as far as I understood, you say that only 3 countries are planning to implement direct payments. And yes, then it is not clear how they will deal with the possible social consequences, because investments which are needed to help the poor take a lot of time, years. For example, the renovation of buildings, even just for the poor people, would take years, if not decades. So, and these people will be fronted with the higher prices in 2027 already. So how is it possible to solve this problem if there are no direct payments? Thank you.
The thing is that, well, first, the Social Climate Fund starts 1 year before, you know that. And if you imagine that you are in Hungary in a vulnerable house, that our calculations is roughly, the case of Hungary, will pay 30, 40 euros per year more. And that's if next year we are able, or even this year, because important, not many people know, eligibility for the Social Climate Fund could be already measures implemented today. So in Hungary, they can already start with, as we have in Brussels, as we have in Portugal, as we have in other countries, that you have a bonus for refurbishment of your windows, or a bonus for changing your heating system, or a bonus for public transport. That is something very easy to implement. So if the bonus for transport is targeted to vulnerables, is not considered a direct income support, it's part of the measures. And this can be done and is eligible to be done by many member states. So we think that yes, I mean, I don't think that policies, first good thing is that policies in member states in building renovation or in transport are there. They are not powerful enough. They are not have money enough, but we are not starting from scratch. So we don't think that you need years to implement refurbishment, or you need to implement access to public transport, or transport on demand. Is something that you create very fast with a software, with a telephone call, with a diverse fleet of cars. And we have north, east, and south examples of this transport on demand. So I think that member states, and very happy to help on that, are equipped on that. And just to remember one thing, recovery funds that are, as you know, big money, 700, 800 billions, has for energy efficiency 166 billion euros. So there are opportunities to really unlock and to avoid the burden for vulnerable citizens to that. But what I agree with you is that we are in a hurry.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Manuele Manigrassi. I work for European Aluminium, so a sector traditionally under ETS 1. And thank you for organizing an event about ETS 2 for once, because a lot of smaller aluminium installations will be under ETS 2. And these are specifically small aluminium recycling plants or extrusions that actually supply the transport and the building sector. So the cost at the end is going to be in the bill. My question was related to the fact that in Germany you have a carbon leakage scheme for small installations that are exposed to competition. And I'm still personally learning about ETS2, and my question was, how does this fit under the different funding mechanisms? Are these schemes under the Social Climate Fund? Is it something separate? And do you see any type of guidelines in the future? Thank you.
I mean, many thanks for your question. Indeed, when the Commission proposal didn't include small industry, as you know, it was only building and transport. It was Parliament who preferred to include it. We didn't put free allowances. It's clear. Also, we have some numbers on exposure of trade, and it was very limited. And this was during the negotiation put on the table. But member states can do, for example, support schemes. Of course, state aid blessed. But member states can use ETS revenues to support the small industry. This can be done. Of course, I insist, the state aid, but this could be done. One last, very good. But I see Peter coming.
Yeah, I'm Eva Schwab from Fianza. I have a question about, because you mentioned the social leasing, and in France, the social leasing scheme as it was rolled out did, according to the evaluation, not actually reach the lowest income deciles. So I'm curious whether you look into the evaluation of the scheme and into the barriers that were there. Thanks.
Absolutely. And thanks for the question. We are very interested in the social leasing. We mentioned the social leasing schemes and a possible, a platform on both the Automotive Action Plan and the Clean Industrial Deal. We had last week in Paris a member that all member states came to listen to these lessons learned from the French system, which deciles how to earmark these deciles, how accessibility is considered. Can we reduce the cost of the leasing with a second step system? So highly interested on that. And we are following with member states high interest. In our promises, we have, and the automotive industry promise for next year, to put a platform, a template, and to do something with that. We are working on that, but in the meantime, because next year looks a little bit far, we are really working very close with member states on cross-feeding and lessons learned from these schemes.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jordi, for making the time despite a very busy schedule, and also for this interaction. And if possible, of course, we would love it if you could stay for the discussion, but we understand if time doesn't permit it. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
And now I'd like to hand over to Bernd Weber for our panel discussion. Over to you, Bernd.
Thank you very much, Parul. Thank you very much, Ms. Jordi, for this inspiring keynote. And welcome, everyone. My name is Bernd Weber. I'm the founder and the CEO of EPICO, and I'm delighted to moderate this discussion with an esteemed panel on one of the most important and probably also politically sensitive issues when it comes to the climate agenda of the European Union, which is the question of compensation within the framework of ETS2, and more specifically, direct payments. So before we jump right in and I introduce you to the esteemed panel, I would like to share a few thoughts with you. First one, and we've heard from the colleague from working for aluminium about ETS1. So far, ETS is a success story, clearly. In Europe, we have managed to decouple economic growth from CO2 emissions much better than other parts of the world. And therefore, expanding the system to other sectors, transport and buildings in particular, holds the potential not only to contribute to our climate targets, to climate neutrality eventually, but also triggers a lot of investment, a lot of innovation, and therefore also strengthens European leadership and also resilience on this. At the same time, ETS2, for the first time, has an impact on the wallet of households. So the households will feel it when they are at the gas station, when they look at their electricity bill, and therefore it is, the social and the acceptance litmus test, if you want, for the market-priced ETS instrument as such. So it's crystal clear, and we've heard that before, that we are at this time at a critical moment. We know that political resistance vis-à-vis the ETS2 is increasing. Several countries are demanding either a delay or a major overhaul. They have concerns about affordability, about fairness. And this makes this question, how to use the future revenues, when to use these revenues, not just a technical design question as you might think. It's really an essential test case of political will and of political and acceptance of society as such. And I'm afraid to say, and we've heard that before also in the discussion, that I don't think that all member states will pass this test as it currently stands. We are still discussing compensation schemes, but we are not seeing a lot of implementation of these compensation schemes, knowing that actually ETS2, the introduction of ETS2, according to the plan, is just around the corner. And one of the most discussed option has been indeed direct payments. Not in all countries, that's true, but in this discussion you see that it holds the potential to soften the economic burden and also to increase acceptance. And the questions that we would like to address in this panel today is, does direct compensation, direct payments, does this really work? How do we need to design such payments so that they can actually work? Are the EU member states ready to deliver on this in an efficient and also equitable way? And is this a one-size-fits-all approach? We have heard rather not. When we compare the different member states, is it a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to the income of households, so low income, mid-income, or high income? So very important questions, and we would like to address them by bringing together different perspectives from policymaking, from civil society, research, and consumers. And yeah, I would like to introduce you to our esteemed panelists, and let me start by Peter Liese. He, if I looked it up correctly, Mr. Liese, he's a member of the European Parliament since more than 30 years? Correct. And like no other, he has been a driver of the architecture of the ETS and also of the ETS2. He has been the environmental policy spokesperson and chief negotiator for the carbon market reform. Welcome, Mr. Liese. Please pick a seat. You may applaud if you want. It's always helpful to kickstart a panel. And the next one, the next panelist that I would like to introduce to you is Sofia Wetmanska. She's co-founder and vice president of the Reform Institute. Hi, Sofia. The Reform Institute is a Polish independent think tank working on public policy, and Sofia will bring in a Central and Eastern European perspective, which is very important for this discussion. Next one that I would like to invite to join us is Luke Haywood. He's Policy Manager, Energy and Climate at the European Environmental Bureau, a network of European environmental NGOs. Hi, Luke. And Luke, I may disclose that you have followed the whole topic of the famous Klimageld also in your previous job when you were working at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Research. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Monika Berg. She's Director of Public Policy and International Cooperation at the ADAC. Welcome. I suppose most of you know what the ADAC is. Definitely all Germans know what the ADAC is. It's Europe's largest automobile association, and Monika served with it during 20 years in the organization, including positions such as head of Berlin liaison and presidential office. So she will bring to the table a consumer's perspective, if I may say so, from the petrol station. Right. So So thank you very much to all of you for joining us for this discussion. I would like to start with an introduction, opening question, which is, do you see the role of direct payments as really a key instrument, key piece of the puzzle, or is it just one among others? And I would like to start with Peter Liese and also add Mr. Liese. Anticipating a little bit your answer, if I may, that we as EPICO, we have issued a policy paper arguing in favor of front-loading of ETS revenues to stay on course for an ETS2 introduction in 2027. In the German media outlet Handelsblatt, you have supported this idea, and I would also like to know from you in how far the two things can reinforce each other. So can front-loading, can making revenues available earlier also help with a form of social compensation?
Yeah, thank you very much for your invitation, and thank you to all the organizers for the engagement in this very important topic. Maybe before I come directly to your question, two general reflections on ETS2. The first one is that when I was the rapporteur on ETS, I was surprised that somehow in 22, the mood completely changed in member states. So in the beginning, we had a majority of member states that were clearly opposing ETS2. And in the course of the year, a huge majority, almost unanimity of the member states supported ETS2. And I asked one of the ambassadors, why did this happen? What happened? What is the reason? And he clearly said, you know, more and more member states realized that when we want to achieve our 2030 climate targets, we have alternatives, but all those are more expensive and also politically more difficult. So when we think ETS2 is difficult, tell me an alternative that is less difficult, that is less expensive. The challenge is the target. It is not an easy ride to achieve this target. So that's why when really people think this is too tough, they should be honest and say our climate targets are too tough. You know, I was very happy that in the parliament we had a huge majority. Also in my political group, only 2 colleagues that are no longer a member of EPP now had voted against. That doesn't mean that all new colleagues are already fine. There are challenges, there are discussions. I don't want to hide this, but I was very happy that after a long discussion, we had this huge support in the European Parliament. Second reflection, and that may be a positive reflection. You know, the first one is negative. We will not make the target if we think we can do it without ETS2, because nobody has a real clue how member states will do their effort sharing without ETS2. But the second is, like the Commission always said, we have also revenues. And we do not only have the Social Climate Fund. The discussion is too much focused on the Social Climate Fund. There is an obligation of the member states to spend the national revenues on purpose and also take social issues into account. And that is way more money, so about 250 billion. On top of that, and in the Social Climate Fund, we have a lot of solidarity. On top of that, we have other funds which include a lot of solidarity, and they were all adopted as a package. You know, I remember when I asked Bea, why should we double the modernization fund? No, and the answer was to get fairness in the system, to also help Central and Eastern European countries to do the transition. And in the end, also that was agreed in the Parliament and the Council with a huge majority. But it's also part of the deal. When people say it's unfair for Bulgaria, look at all the revenues, and not only on the Social Climate Fund, but also on the Modernization Fund, the solidarity mechanism in the ETS, and other things. I think my position is clear. We shouldn't lose sight of our targets. We should really try to achieve them. We have a huge responsibility, especially in this global geopolitical time. Trump left the Paris Agreement, but nobody followed. Even Millet didn't follow. So there is an opportunity to keep the climate process running. And the first time in history, China is considering to have an ambitious reduction target. People speak about 30%, 35% less than today. And that will be the game changer. So if we are weak, then that will be a problem. On the direct payments, we have to accept it. I was skeptical in the negotiations. So was a rapporteur on the Social Climate Fund, Esther de Lange. She always said, you give somebody who is starving a fish, and he will not be hungry for one day. You learn to fish, and then he will never be hungry. So that was our logic. We want to enable people to do the transition. And I think that should be also our main focus. We should enable people to do the transition. I'm very convinced that 70 to 80% of the citizens want the transition, but they don't know how to do it, and we should enable them. On the other hand, we don't have enough installers. We don't have enough people that insulate houses. And also the transition in the road transport will not be from one day to the other. That's why direct payments have to play a role. And people need to understand that they are compensated for the increase that they cannot get rid of, because the transition is not a one-off issue. And here, the front-loading really can help. We need to show people that it is possible before the price kicks in. I think that's very, very important, in particular for those countries where there is no carbon price yet, so that people understand there are opportunities. It's not only a cost, it's also revenues and it's possibilities that we get. So I think, and here is a big challenge in communication. Many member states didn't really do it right, including the one I know best. We need to make it very transparent where the money is going, and there should also be some stability in the funding. And people should understand, no, it's not for the finance ministers to fill the pocket or do some prestige things. It is spent on purpose. And that can be a mixture of direct payment and support for the transition, but it must be transparent. We have it in the legal text, but implementation is far from perfect, and a lot of work has to be done. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for these insights. Little advertisement, the paper that I mentioned before is somewhere here in the room. Outside of the room, okay, feel free to take one with you if you want to dig deeper into the front-loading question. I would like now to come to Sophia. Sophia, we talked already here on the panel and already before about Central and Eastern European countries. Of course, I will mention now that Poland has voted yesterday for a new president, which is rather Europe and climate skeptical, President Nawrocki. But to be honest, already before, Donald Tusk has been quite outspoken with regard to ETS2. He has been one of the biggest critics. How do you see the role of social compensation, direct payments in particular, in countries like Poland, which are undergoing an economic transformation? Is this a way to bring Poland on board for starting the ETS2 in 2027?
There's always a way. Yeah, apologies about the elections. Not my fault, not my fault. But there are two perspectives I think I want to discuss. One is political, one is technical. When we talk about the political perspective and direct payments, it's all about trust in government. So if you've got high trust in government, then the government has high flexibility to actually deliver investments that shield society from impacts on time and ahead of time. So that scenario is the ideal scenario, and that usually works. But in countries where you've got low trust in the government, such as Poland, direct payments become a tool to mitigate that, to address that, to provide additional flexibility, to gain that sort of buy-in from society. So essentially, I can easily understand why not all of the countries are applying for direct payments in social climate funds, in plans, and this comes down, from my perspective, to that trust in government. And on the other hand, you do have the newly elected president, again, sorry, and he promised three things with regards to energy and climate in his 100 days. One is to do a referendum against European Green Deal. The other thing is to do a summit against Green Deal. And the third one is to redirect payments, revenues from ETS, and he was talking about ETS1, as direct payments to society. So definitely he's looking for ways so that the society could benefit. Again, very populist move, but given that there would be a flexibility for ETS2 revenues to introduce that direct payment, it could be harder for him to veto ETS2, right? So if he's looking for that direct payment approach and he has it on the table, then, well, that's a difficult argument and difficult tool not to say no to. So that flexibility, perhaps, ironically, could help us to get a bit of a buy-in on ETS2. But political things aside, and they are very important here with direct payments, there's that technical perspective, and we already heard about it to some extent, that even with very ambitious renovation, deep renovations, deep retrofits, assuming 3-4% happening on time, and everything is going well according to ambitious scenarios, there's still going to be a third of single-family houses that are being and using and relying on coal. So the transition is not going to happen overnight. And 2 years is not enough for everyone to benefit from these investments. So from that perspective, direct payments are that intermediary tool, intermediary support that is needed so that, yes, while we introduce investments, and yes, while we provide that shift and transition, those who won't have time to benefit from investments and won't yet be still able to benefit will have a chance to actually be shielded from the impact. And finally, perhaps social climate fund is not enough, and that argument is to say the scale of shock. If you have a country that heavily relies on coal, Poland again, then the scale of shock is really high. So the people who would be affected, people who are using coal and still are not the sort of the lowest bracket, but still some high levels up, the scale of shock for them would be equal to the scale of shock that people who are using and relying on gas will, in the lowest bracket, will experience. So the coal element or coal factor is really important, and we've seen the social climate fund. It's going to be provided to public consultations, I think, yesterday or today by the government. They intend to use the direct payments, but they only intend to shield seniors, so 65 plus, and that will not completely be sufficient, right? To delineate the eligibility for that support only by the mere fact that you receive pension is not enough, and much wider support is needed. So that's one aspect. And my final is that you do have a great expectation for the price of ETS2 to skyrocket in upcoming years. And while social climate funds and social climate plans can only do so much because of the boundaries and safeguards, perhaps ETS2 can be used to mitigate that sort of increasing prices effects that we can anticipate beyond 2030. So again, that social climate fund is a great shield, but perhaps could not be enough, especially if we have coal in the system, to protect the society we need. So we need to protect the vulnerable groups. So yeah, useful tool.
Yeah, thank you very much. I understood intermediary but complementary tool, direct payments, which are necessary from your perspective. Luke, many NGOs have been lukewarm, apologies for the wordplay, with regard to the introduction of ETS2, partly due to social concerns. Now, from an environmental NGO perspective, what can be done to render the system as socially fair as possible, in your view?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for supposing that environmental NGOs care a lot about social aspects, because they do. And thank you for hosting this event. I would really like to say that I don't think direct payments are a key element. I would like to say, let's focus on investment. I would like to say, let's focus on heat pumps, trains, e-bikes. These are things that environmental NGOs have always liked. But I can't ignore what's happening, and above all, I can't ignore what's not happening. We've been talking about this policy mix, but we don't see the countries taking the necessary steps to avoid high prices. There are 5 countries, I think, are responsible for about 3/4 of all emissions: Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Poland. If these countries don't adopt other policies, non-ETS2 policies, to reduce their emissions, there is a very serious risk that we get the high prices that the academic literature, etc., says to us. So it's not an inbuilt feature of ETS2 that we have high prices and problems. It's because the governments are not doing other things. They are not implementing other policies that will reduce the emissions fast. And as an environmental NGO, count us in. We're in for speed limits on German motorways. We're in for banning short internal flights that the French Citizens' Climate Assembly suggested was a good idea. We're in for banning gas boilers tomorrow. We're in for banning diesel and petrol cars. We don't have to wait to 2035. Yeah, we're up for it. What are the governments of these big emitting countries, what are they putting on the table? What are they suggesting to avoid high prices for the whole of the EU? This is where I really have a big problem in seeing how we can ensure that we avoid these high prices. If we do get these high prices, I believe it's unsustainable that we do not have direct payments. And the main reason, yes, it's super important that these investments come, and yes, investments take time. But the other point is, if we want to target the people who are not only affected, but who are affected and they don't have the money and they can't get away from their dependence on fossil fuels, we're talking about a targeting in at least 3 dimensions. So the problem is it's extremely difficult to identify, to reach, and then to help all the people who will feel very unfairly affected by high prices. It's just not easy. Some people might be hit by price increases of other goods. Firewood might increase. Some people might not be able to invest because of credit constraints, credit rating, because of their age. Other people might not be able to prove that they have low incomes because they're self-employed and they do their tax declaration 3 years later. All these people are going to feel treated unfairly. All these problems are solvable, but are they solvable in 1.5 years? And if there's only one of these cases, will the right-wing media put them on the front page of the newspaper? Will they kick up a huge fuss? What do we think? As an environmental NGO, we're extremely concerned about this. So the problem is vulnerable people will be hit. The extreme right will exploit this. The fossil fuel lobby have extremely a lot of money on this. This is not just theory. What happened 3 years ago? We were in a very similar situation. We had high fossil fuel prices, not politically induced, not for climate reasons. But what happened? We had high fossil fuel prices. There was the good reaction that we want. People saved energy. Individually, they saved energy. Also, governments did sensible things to save energy. We discussed them, we analyzed them. There were many interesting, good energy savings programs across the EU. But there were also 2 other things that countries did. One was there were some direct compensation schemes where people got money independent of how much fossil fuels they consumed, exactly what we want, direct payments. But most countries, nearly all countries, spent an awful lot of money subsidizing fossil fuels because they didn't want to accept the high prices. They spent the money so that their citizens would get the good that was expensive because it was rare. And that is just very stupid. So, sorry, I realize time is slipping. The high prices need a fast political reaction, not technical solutions, and it should be super simple to reach everyone. And yeah, you can do it social, you can tax it later, but give it to everyone. The Austrians have some great learnings there, and
yeah, we will come back to, thank you, Luke. We will come back to the Austrians later on. Don't know if some Austrians are here in the public. What I got from your remarks is basically that you have done, although you would have preferred other measures, you have done a reality check and come to the conclusion that direct payments are very much needed.
Yeah, so ETS2 carbon pricing is not environmental NGOs' favorite measure in the past, but this is what we have on the table now. We're talking about 40% reduction in the next 5 years in these sectors that haven't decarbonized. We have observed very closely the discussions about regulation in, say, buildings sectors, and we've seen how difficult that is. Peter Liese said it quite correctly, I think. So this is on the table. This is the thing we want to make work now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luke. I would turn now to Monica and adopt more of a consumer perspective. So we know that many citizens are worrying about high carbon prices in road transport. And we do know that ETS too will have some effect on the wallet at the gas station. So from a consumer's perspective in the transport sector, are these direct payments a solution? What else would be potentially needed to address these concerns? Also to avoid what Luke has said before, the articles in tabloids like Bild talking about the increase of the prices.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here to give my, I would say, limited perspective of a German automobile club, not an automobile association. That's important, not the producer side, but the consumer side, which is maybe not so limited and maybe a little representative for motorists all over Europe. Let me say, first of all, the issue of CO2 pricing is not an easy one for an automobile club. ADAC has 22.3 million members today. That is every fourth German. This is like every second household in Germany. And our membership, I would say, is as diverse as Germany itself. So our members ride bikes and take trains and buses. But what they all do is they're motorists, because our core service to our members is nothing but roadside assistance, also to bicycles, but mainly to cars. And as diverse this membership is, if there is one question on which they all would agree, it is about affordability of driving a car. And affordability sometimes means no more expensive than it is today. Sometimes means no more expensive than I can afford, but it is about affordability. And we all observe, and you've said it before, whenever the fuel price goes up beyond what we know from the everyday fluctuations, goes beyond that, there is a highly emotional debate, there is resistance, there is fears triggered that mobility might not be affordable in the future. So just to give you a number, we ask our members constantly about their outlook on future mobility, and 60% would say an absolute no to any political measure which would bring fuel prices up. And the reason is, of course, that driving a car for many, many people in everyday life is still very important. And most of the cars would be ICEs and not electric cars. So it is not an easy issue. But a second reflection, ADAC did not oppose when Germany introduced a national ETS a couple of years ago. And ADAC did not oppose, it was hard to support it, but did not oppose when the EU directive was implemented, and did not oppose, even though we had a discussion when Germany transformed it into German law. But this does not necessarily mean it is popular. It is not. It is not popular. We didn't oppose it though, because of course we know that that if we really want to address, and if you really want to reduce CO2 emissions in transport, we do need measures, additional measures to what we are able to do today. And a market-driven mechanism like it is being implemented now is certainly a very effective, a very efficient answer. And thus, even though the discussions get more challenging for us, ADAC will definitely stand by the ETS2 directive and the implementation in Europe. So now, how important are direct payments? Of course, from our view, it is important that people must not be financially overburdened by whatever is about to come now.
German has a CO2 price now of 55 euros. So that's quite a lot. So let's see how we transform that system. But whatever comes now must never overburden people or make them afraid it might overburden them, because this is when you get the resistance already. And we're afraid that that might jeopardize our efforts to implement and bring through the ETS2, and it might maybe even more jeopardize any acceptance of climate politics and transport as a whole. So what do we need? We believe that we need to get things balanced, and the direct payments are a key part, the one part. So we definitely do need, and it's not easy for me to say this, but we do need, of course we do need rising fuel prices. Otherwise, a transition is not going to happen. This is the essence of the system that we have. But people then need the opportunity to switch their habit and to switch over to more sustainable modes of transport. So we need the possibility to do this. And looking at Germany today, and I believe this is true to many European countries, this is not everyday reality. This is not possible for everyone, not everywhere, and not in 2027. It is right to invest a lot of the revenue into measures in favor of, and I'm only talking transport now, public transport, bike riding, electric bikes, electric mobility. This is all good to do. It keeps prices down, and it gives people a chance to avoid the CO2 price at all. But none of these are fast-acting measures. It's going to take a time, and there will always be people who will not be able, cannot afford, or maybe, and that's about acceptance, are not willing yet to change their habits. And this is why I too come to the conclusion that direct payments are a very, very important part. And let me say, and I think you were hinting to that, Germany is not a very good example for that. We implemented a national ETS system, and it was promised to consumers that we all also would pay money to everyone. Now the CO2 price came, the direct payment never did. And this does not help. This is not good. So this is something to learn from. Shouldn't do that. Well, yeah, anyway, so it is an important part, and let me close in the first round with that.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. I think it reminds one a little bit of the discussion that we've had on the German heating law, infamous German heating law, where we talked a lot about additional costs, and we forgot to talk sufficiently about support measures, and this miscommunication, if I may say so, can have really disastrous effects. Peter, you've grabbed the mic, so I suppose you wanted to react to Monica.
No, mainly to Luke, and also to make visible to the audience in which situation we are. But first of all, I didn't say it in my first intervention. Thank you to EPICO for this study. I said I support front-loading, but it is also important that we have scientific backing for this idea. And Bea, we talked about this a lot. I think this study can encourage you and your people to work really hard on it. I value very much the work of T&E, and we work a lot together also on the ETS. ETS aviation, ETS maritime were your favorites, ETS2 in the beginning not, but you have also been convinced that the targets are not achievable without. And I want to really emphasize that you only scrapped the surface when you said ban combustion engines earlier than 2035. Because even if we ban combustion engines tomorrow, which I strongly oppose, so I'm for technological openness, I'm for the market, and give different technologies an opportunity. But my key message is, if we ban combustion engines tomorrow and do not have any other tool, we will not meet our 2030 target. Because we have millions of old cars on the street, and they will be still on the street in 2030. So we focus our debate too much on new cars. But many people don't buy a new car in the next 3 weeks, and maybe not in the next 10 years, not in the next 3 years, and maybe not in the next 10 years, in particular, if we don't have an incentive to do it. And that's why ETS2 is so important. It incentivizes also the buying of a new car. That's why I'm a bit surprised that car industry is so silent. You know, they should be in favor, because new cars are good for the environment, because they are normally more clean, much more clean than old cars. And they also, you know, maybe a guarantee for jobs in Europe. If people don't buy a new car, we also have an economic problem. And banning combustion heating, fossil heating, you know, the Germans witnessed that this is not the way. So we need to find better ways, and that's why I think the ETS is a good solution, because it keeps options available. It keeps options on the table, and everybody who has a good idea, and when you go to transport, the ideas are millions, you know, individual choices. Every day you can choose to go by car or to go by bicycle, and this is nothing the state can decide. So some people are saying we need more command and control measures instead of ETS2. But do we want to tell people, okay, today the sun is shining, you don't buy car, you don't go by car, it's good for bicycle, or you have to prove that you go and buy some stuff which you cannot transport by bicycle. So command and control measures are limited, and that's good. We are not allowed to intervene in people's daily life. It should be individual choices, but everybody who chooses the low carbon should benefit. And that's the logic of the ETS, and that's why I think it's so important. Command and control measures, even if we are more rigid than any NGO would dream, will not help us to get the climate target, because they are so sophisticated. It's not about new cars only, it's not about new buildings, it's not about broken boilers. If you do it without incentives, without the market, you need to go to the seller and tell people your boiler is switched off now. And I don't want Europe or any national government to do this.
Probably I would also advise against it, judging from the experience that we've had in Germany with that. So thank you. We understand, Peter and also Monica, your position that command and control is, you know, not sufficient or not the right way. Incentives are needed. And I would like to recenter the conversation a little bit to something that we established in the first round, that direct payments are an important instrument, at least intermediary instrument that will be needed. And I want to ask Luke first. So these direct payments, I mean, we have heard about the German approach with the Klimageld, you know it very well from your previous job. So basically one uniform bonus to everyone. That's one way of designing it. Another form would be the Austrian model, which adjusts the payment more to income and or geographical location. So you touched upon this very briefly in your introductory statement. So if we establish a consensus that there should be some form of direct payment, how should we design it so that it can actually be efficient?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, the German experience is that they haven't implemented it, so it's sort of limited. But correct, the basic idea was probably, but this was maybe also one of the reasons why it didn't come, that there wasn't an agreement on what exactly it should look like. So that's also a cautionary tale on over-engineering a complicated system that then doesn't come. This is something that the Austrians also told us. the difficulty, at least in Austria, and it'll depend a lot on the country. So Belgium, for example, is a lot more digitally sophisticated than Germany. They have much better system of tracking all individuals and their bank accounts, which is not, it's a low bar to cross, but still. I don't know about other countries, but the practical problems of implementation are serious, especially if, and I think that's a really important aspect, you really want to reach everyone. And the people that you really want to reach are the people who will not apply. They will not fill in a form. Maybe they don't fill in tax forms. Maybe they don't have a bank account. These are the people, yes, it's only a few percent, but these are the people who would really benefit from this. Austria tried that. They sent letters, they sent reminders, they sent more letters to try and get people's bank accounts, and the people who didn't get a bank account, they got a voucher they could take to the post office. I think this is super interesting. The Austrians also had a staggered approach where they said, look, first we're going to give everyone some money. Then there was the 2022 energy price crisis. So they said, let's give people a little bit more money than would have been in the carbon price pot. And then later they said, okay, let's tax it ex post. So everyone gets it, and later then with your personal individual tax rate, it's taxed away. There's also a proposal by a German think tank to have a specific tax function for this type of income. So you could give it to everyone below a certain income and tax it away completely for people who are above a certain threshold. I think if we're talking about how do we get people on board, how do we convince people, the political argument, it's super important that it just arrives, it comes, you see it, it's not complicated. Then later, if you want to have it in a social way, you can do that with the tax system. And the regional differentiation, I think, is relevant. The argument, of course, was public transport infrastructure is poor in rural areas, or poorer in rural areas in Austria than in urban areas. And of course, this is something the state is providing. So it seems fair to differentiate regionally, but the differentiation is limited. There's only 4 different zones, and the most sophisticated, the highest one is only in Vienna. So I think it makes sense. It's simple, but we will not get a system that will differentiate in a sort of really fair way, because it's just too complicated. Individuals are too different. So I mean, that's why we're in direct payments in the first place.
Yeah. So I summarize. Differentiation needed, yes, makes sense, but let's keep it simple. Let's not over-engineer it, so to say. We've said before that this cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. Turning to you again, Sophia, there are, of course, always national specifications that need to be taken into account. That's also the case for Poland. What is important to consider when implementing some form of direct payment in Poland, potentially in Central and Eastern European countries as such, if one may say so?
Can I first disagree?
Always.
I understand the argument of wanting simplicity, and especially with omnibus and everything, and the regulation language flowing around. That's very tempting. But I would argue that we do have a number of success stories around targeting the right groups and targeting the right beneficiaries of these programs. Poland, especially with Clean Air program, with energy voucher that has been implemented. Both programs have a number of challenges, endless challenges, but in terms of actually reaching the targeted groups, they are very successful. And I think the big difference in what you're saying is that a lot of these programs that failed to reach the end targets were about encouraging them to invest. However, if you want to give money away, that's slightly easier. Everyone receives pension. Everyone receives has some interaction where the money flows to them or from them, if at the large regulatory way. So giving money should be slightly easier, and from that perspective, it's much easier to design targeted approaches. So, so I would argue that the architecture of the system might not be as complicated as we are painting it in this discussion. And then you do have a number of factors such as sort of coal and gas do differ between themselves in terms of the shock that is going to be present after the introduction of ETS2. So if you do not differentiate by the type of fuels, by the type of income, by the type of region, it becomes the pool of money gets really spread really thin, and you lose the opportunities to act and support the most vulnerable. So I would argue that this targeted design is actually something we would look for and look forward to, given that the pot of money, everyone sort of has an idea on how to use the pot of money, so best to use it in the most efficient manner. And I think the biggest argument for targeted design would be that if you target if you design a targeted system where you differentiate by the income or differentiate by the fuel source, it proves that you identify a priority list for the renovations, for the retrofits, for how to help and who to help. So if you digitalize it, and that was the case for Poland, we updated a major spreadsheet where you've got information on all of the building stock that needs to be renovated, that needs to be retrofitted, that needs support. So that direct payment becomes a tool or the very first step that allows you to introduce investments in much more efficient manner, because you do the ground legwork essentially in that very first step. So that is a very nice sort of segue from direct payments to investments and how they can link and work together. So, and it's proved very helpful already in Poland. So I think that we've got very few success stories in a number of fields, elections again, but I think that is a good one and one to be investigated, I'd say.
Thank you very much, Sophia, also for disagreeing. I always encourage this disagreement on the panel. I would like to come to you, Monica, with the last question on the panel. Then I would like to open up the discussion with the audience. So if you already have a question more or less in mind, try to think it through and address it afterwards. So Monica, you mentioned the issue in Germany with the communication on the climate dividend. And I was wondering, what's your perspective on the coalition treaty? Because there we are not talking really about the climate dividend anymore in the German case. So the German non-experience has led to a situation where the climate dividend has mostly, I would say, not entirely, but slipped off the radar, at least if my reading of the coalition treaty is correct. What's your opinion on this? Is this, also in terms of communication, because the Germans, for those of you who don't know it, the government looks at a reduction of grid tariffs of the electricity task. So they are focusing on the energy part, which makes sense. I've worked on energy market design and these kind of things very much, and my impression is this is a very technical discussion. So how clear will it be for citizens that the government is helping them really with ETS2?
I do share your reading. I have the same impression. We have the same impression. The climate dividend cannot be found in our coalition treaty. We searched it very thoroughly. We didn't see it, and not even with a friendly reading, you could find it in there. What is true, but nevertheless, is that the government is working on a technical mechanism to be able to make direct payments to citizens. So it is not completely over. They're still working on the mechanism behind it, but with no end date. So we don't know when this will be possible, and we do not know if it will be used for a climate dividend or something like that. So we're not very optimistic on that one. It is still still important to discuss it, just like you do today. It is still important to discuss this option for people. What I feel, what we read the German government is trying, they're using mechanisms which are already in place to reduce the financial burden for motorists, which might come if the price increases. So this is a tax allowance, which is not very popular among environmental NGOs, the tax allowance for commuters. It is a piece of legislation which is there and which can easier be adapted if prices go high. So I have the impression we are looking for possible and realistic and fast ways to be able to reduce a burden which might come. So how do we read this? Well, I think it is understood that we must give people a perspective that change is wanted, that we switch, that we transform the mobility system. We want climate neutral transport, but we're doing it technology open. We're doing it with a realistic perspective and trying to relieve the possible burden on people. So message understood, but one of the key mechanisms which would correspond an ETS is still not in place. This is how I would say it.
Maybe as a spark of hope for those who are in favor of direct payments, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, at least in the campaign, has mentioned several times that he's in favor of not only of the ETS2, that for sure, but also of a climate dividend direct payment approach. Yes, now I would like to open up the floor to questions from the audience that you might want to address to our very knowledgeable panelists. And we have the first one in the second row, the gentleman over there in the blue jacket.
Yeah, thank you very much. Jakob Dieterchmer from the International Commission for the Protection of the Alps. So we have branch offices all over the Alps, 2 of them in Austria. So just a word on the Klimabonus, as it was called in Austria. So it was abolished by the new government, as you probably know, which saves Austria 2.3 billion euros per year. And you know, I mean, the direct payments, they were not subject to any conditions. So partly people spend them not for climate-friendly things, whatever holidays, whatever. And the questions to one of you panelists: do you see a mechanism where these payments can be subject to conditions that we make people spend the money really for climate-friendly purposes and not the opposite? Thank you.
Yeah, there was also important message that was conveyed by Beatrix before. So what's the opinion on the panel on this? Peter?
Yeah, first of all, the spark of hope for all those that support ETS in general and ETS2 is in fact Friedrich Merz. I know him very well. We live 30 kilometers away and we go walking in the same forest. And he's not famous for being pro-climate, but he speaks about climate in every speech. Also in Valencia at the EPP Congress. And he speaks in favor of market-driven measures. So on Austria, I think that's also a lesson learned. Unfortunately, the climate dividend was stopped. And that was a big surprise for me. Unfortunately, the ÖVP made also these talks with the FPÖ, with the far right. And on that one, they had the exactly same wording. So to keep the carbon price, not to stop it. So the far right, when they would have been in government in Austria, would have kept the carbon price. That should not be hidden for everybody when the far right does campaigns. In Austria, they were ready to keep it and abolish the dividend. So that's something, you know, that is not a good example for Europe. And I doubt, Beatrice, if this is legal. You know, we have in the directive from 27 on that the money should be spent on purpose. And I don't know how the Austrians will follow this obligation. There are many reasons why Austria is in this situation and why they need the 3 billion. But we should insist that the money is spent on purpose. I think the climate dividend can't be linked with obligations, because it's exactly the logic of this direct payment that it doesn't have obligations. You get obligations when you get support for the transition. Then it's a targeted, conditional spending. The reason why we talk about this climate dividend is that part of the society will not be able to do the transition from day one. And that's why you cannot make it conditional. But I think we have also the obligation to be transparent. And that's maybe the only thing that we can learn from Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban, on all electricity bills and all energy bills, has information about the costs and how the government reduce the cost. Sometimes they are not exact, they are not exactly true, so they should be true. But I would think about a direct payment where people get a payment. Some colleagues in my group say better every month, because you suffer from the price increase every day when you go to the gasoline station. Not every year, but every month you get a payment. And then you get an additional information. What kind of solutions do we have? Social leasing, I don't think the French way is the perfect example, but the idea is good to support people. The French supported only very few citizens with a high amount of money for the individual contract. When you do it a bit more careful, you can help more people. But that's what I think would be a good solution, a direct payment with an information where you can get more support when you want to do the transition. So I think that's part of the solution, that we have this unconditional payment, but more of opportunities. And I think that's the key of the whole debate. We need to speak about opportunities. We should not speak only about the burden. We should not speak about bans. We should speak about solutions, because banning things when we don't have alternatives is also very difficult for people. So let's offer them solutions and speak every day about the solutions.
Can I echo this?
Directly, and then it goes to Sophia.
Yes, just like to echo this. I also believe that any conditions will not make it less complex. It's going to be even more difficult, and communication is key here. So it's about telling people you can even be better off if you try to avoid the carbon price. If you switch to electric mobility, make it more what you get. So it's about communication here. I'm not sure about every month. It's not going to be a huge sum, which is going to impress very much, as we're limited here, I think, and it is just one element of revenue spending. So it's a good idea, but I just don't think it's going to be a sum which will really convince people.
Yeah, thanks for emphasizing this as well. I fully agree that we need to talk more about opportunities indeed for reducing electricity prices instead of higher cost electricity and yeah, all kinds of prices, carbon prices really. Sophia, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just quickly, the alternative to unconditional direct payments would be that you affect the price of coal or price of gas, and you distort the signal, right? So it's very counterproductive if you go for that direction, because it doesn't add up in the system and doesn't provide the sufficient signal for the transition as a whole. So I'd rather it doesn't distort the signal of the fossil fuel, and you can get your money and spend it on anything else. But you also assume that you are like the people who receive the payments are smart economic actors, and if they prefer, if they have been selected to receive the payment, and they still prefer to spend it on iPhone rather than on a bunch of coal or gas, then that means that the market solves it for itself. Like you sort of go away from buying fossil fuels. So that's the positive end effect. So economically speaking, it's to our benefit that you can spend it on anything else but your fossil fuel-based heating, if you decide you can sort of make that decision and allow yourself, and your heating comfort is where it should be, and so on. So it's better not to distort the price signal for fossil fuels, and then let's assume we do have smart economic actors that decide in favor, say.
One sentence, and then we go to the next question.
Okay, thank you very much, because I'm still on the targeting. So for precisely the reasons, Sophia, that you just gave,
thank you.
I think targeting is not as easy as people think. It's not just the fossil fuel costs that might rise. If a delivery service, if the care services who come home and drive around with their car all day, if they are faced with higher ETS2 prices, they will increase the costs of the prices of their services. Costs will rise for other things. If I'm faced with a situation, either I pay more ETS2, I pay the costs for the gas boiler, or I invest for a heat pump, I have monthly payments for the heat pump. Should I not receive any dividends because I'm not paying for the fossil fuels, because I'm paying for the heat pump? Should I not get anything? For example, if I move out of the rural area because ETS2 is too expensive, now I move to the city, I pay higher rent. Should I not get anything then? All these reactions, moving away from fossil fuel dependency, they might lead to increased costs of all sorts of other things. And these people should get something too, I think.
Very long sentence, but a good one though. We have more questions in the audience, so can I see the hands? Yeah, there's one gentleman in the second row, please.
Thank you very much. I am András Lukács from the Clean Air Action Group Hungary. And my question is, why don't you, or why is it that practically nobody uses one of the most important arguments in favor of direct payments? This is the fact that the current system is very unjust, and it could be partly corrected by the direct payments. Today, fossil fuels are enormously subsidized. According to the IMF, every minute, fossil fuels are subsidized by a rate of $30 million. And most of this subsidy goes to the rich people. For example, in Hungary, the richest 10% of the population or households consume or spend 50% more on gas and about 10 times more on car use than the poorest 10%. It means that they receive much more subsidy. The rich people receive much more subsidy than the poor people, and this could be partly corrected by direct payments. So why this argument is not used? That's my question.
So to rephrase it, is this a valid argument in favor of direct payments? Does somebody want to respond to that? Monica?
Yeah, I agree. But on the other side, the richer you are, it is probably easier to adapt to new technologies and avoid CO2 pricing. So you have an advantage there, and this is a bit a downside on that argument. But it is true. The more energy you consume, the higher you will feel the CO2 price. That's how it is constructed. And you get less back if there is a per capita climate dividend, that's for sure. But you can afford it, so yeah.
But yeah, it's important that you raise this argument, because in the debate it's often said it hits the poor more than the rich, and that is not true. You know, we need to protect those that have a low income, because even the small increase of their monthly payment will be burdensome, and they have no flexibility. But ETS hits the ones that have big cars, big houses, more than the poor. And that's why it is not socially unfair as such, but we need to look at those that are at the margin, that they cannot afford anything.
Thank you also for clarifying that indeed there are a couple of studies on this, basically emphasizing exactly what you've said, including your former employer. Right, so I don't see any more questions, so I have the privilege of having a last round of questions. It's one question only, don't worry, which I would like to address to the panel, and I would very much appreciate a very short and concise answer, ideally one word or half of Luke's sentence length. And the question is, what is the major, or the one, if you would have to name one piece of puzzle that's missing for making, for continuing the success of ETS in the building and in the transport sector, so namely ETS2, what would it be? Maybe we start with Monica, ladies first, no pressure.
It's compensate to build trust. This is what is needed. It's about trust. And people must believe that they will be compensated if it hits them too much.
That's very concise, one word, trust. Peter, what's your choice?
To be transparent and clear and loud on the opportunities. So help people to do the transition.
Trust, opportunities, enabling people for the transition. Sophia, what would it be?
All of the above, but maybe to add that the scale of the shock will differ across the countries, across the fuels, across the different income groups and so on. So that flexibility is much needed. And again, it still will differ across the governments or the countries, depending on that trust factor. And the flexibility is needed, I'd say.
That's interesting that you deviate from trust, the need for flexibility and differentiation. Valid point. Luke, last but not least, a few words have already been put on the table, so you are allowed to repeat them, but it's better if you find a new one.
I agree with everything, and I think honesty about certain technological battles and honesty about expected prices would be helpful from governments. I'd like to continue, but
yeah, I'm just thinking what that honesty would be. So honesty, isn't that part of that honesty that the ETS2 price will not rise as many are forecasting it at the beginning? Is that what you mean, or is it something else? Or is it exactly the opposite what you mean?
No, okay, so I would a package of a carbon floor price, saying, look, the carbon price is not going to go below whatever, 60 euros, because then the expectations are set, and that will lead to investment, which will actually lead to the price not going too high, which is something that's too complicated for people. I mean, it's difficult to communicate. And the other thing about honesty is heat pumps work. We shouldn't be installing gas boilers and telling people maybe there's a way for hydrogen. EVs work. We shouldn't be telling people maybe there's a sort of option for e-fuels in some future. So technological openness, yes. Have the competition, and then when there's a winner there, be honest, this is the winner.
Okay, I followed up with a question, so it's my fault. But no, thank you, seriously. Right, so we come to the end of this very interesting discussion. I will not try to summarize everything that we have touched upon on this panel. I will recall the last words, so to say, of our panelists, which have been trust, transparency, enabling people talk about opportunities of the ETS2, not only about additional costs, and honesty in communication and technological solutions, if I summed it up more or less correctly. And I would like to thank everybody for this very insightful discussion. Beatrice, who has already left the room, but she stayed for us for the raised majority of the time, and also our very knowledgeable panelists. We are very grateful to you for sharing your insights with us. So Peter, Sophia, Monica, Luke, thank you very much. You may applaud if you enjoyed the conversation. And I certainly have. My takeaway, by the way, is that you might actually be able to learn something from Viktor Orban. That was new to me as well. And of course, I would like to thank the audience for your interest in this event, for joining us in this discussion. I would like to thank our partners who have co-hosted this event together with us. The event has been many months in the making, and a lot of people were involved. Some of them you don't see on this panel. So this is why I would like to thank our co-organizers, which is Luke Haywood from EBB, but also Marie Zeller from Zukunft Klimasozial, Federico Terrini from T&E, and of course my EPICO colleagues from Berlin and Brussels, Simon, Julian, Michaela, and Joanne. Yeah, and I think I speak on behalf of everybody who hosted this event when I say that we will continue to think ahead, try to flow solutions, concepts. Feel free to follow up with us now or afterwards. Read our newest policy papers. Again, EPICO paper just around the corner. I think colleagues from T&E have also issued a paper today.
I have also a paper.
You have also a paper. Very, very good. So make sure to also read Peter's paper. And I think we have a lot food for thought. And now I think we have a little reception, and I believe there's also some food, but at least some drinks to continue the conversation if you want. Thank you very much to everybody, and have a nice evening.